Welcome, everybody. I see the attendees are loading, so we'll give it a good 30 seconds to a minute or until it plateaus, and then we'll kick things off. Okay, I think most people are loaded. That's awesome. So we'll kickstart things over here. So thanks for joining us today. So today's presentation is on mastering GDAP and CSP. We have David Haynes here. He's our Information Security Officer. He's also CISSP certified. He'll be doing the presentation today. I'm hoping for some great content for you guys. Again, this is one of those value add. You're not sitting into a marketing pitch here, which is great. I want to call out that yes, we do record the sessions. We absolutely send it to everyone afterwards, so no concerns there. And the ground rules, if possible, let's use the chat for commenting, chatting, banter, all good. If you actually want a question answered, please use the Q&A because those things allow us to retain them in the list and actually mark them as answered afterwards so we can make sure that we get through all the questions. So with that said, I'll let David kick it off.
Perfect. So thanks, Robbie. Make sure I know how to use PowerPoint properly. It's been a while. But yeah, I'm David Haynes. I'm the Information Security Officer here at Augment. I spend a lot of time working with MSPs around security best practices as some people are rolling it out themselves, as well as I do our own internal compliance for our SOC audits. So if you're interested in any of our compliance documents, you might have emailed me for them. And yeah, so we're going to kind of go over a little bit of the foundations of what GDAP is what Microsoft's trying to do there. A couple slides around best practices where I see MSPs kind of get hung up on with the setup. Some of it is Microsoft best practice, some of it's personal opinion to me, what I like to see on the security side of things. And then I'm going to do a demo within Entra before leading into our Q&A. So again, yeah, as Robbie said, questions, please use the question feature so we can track them. But let's just jump into it. So what is GDAP? For those of you who don't know, a few years ago, Microsoft made the transition from DAP, Delegated Admin Privileges, to GDAP. The names kind of speak for themselves. DAP was limited in the role assignment. You can only really do global admin, help desk administrator, which really wasn't granular enough for security purposes. And it made connected companies a juicy target for people trying to take advantage of that their connectivity. So an MSP connected to 100 companies is a lot easier, a lot more valuable to breach than a single company. And we saw the impacts of that with the SolarWinds breach. And that's really what kicked Microsoft off to come out with the granular aspect. And the other one is that there was no time limits on the relationships that could be configured with DAP. On the flip side, GDAP, again, the name speaks for itself. It's granular in its role assignment, which makes it easier to secure, but also harder to configure properly. And then another value benefit is that it's time limited on the relationships. And I'll speak to that where you can get value from that as well for project work. That's the core differences. So ultimately, why should MSPs use GDAP? You use the CSP with GDAP. It'll save you time, improve your services, enhance your security and accountability. The saving time comes from not having to have individual accounts for each individual customer that you have to then log in and use and provision different access for all of your techs to use, which then lets you delegate more efficiently, improving your service. And then the security aspect, I think, will speak for itself through this because it's only it's a smaller number of accounts to manage. And then it's a lot easier to hold yourself and your team accountable to what they actually do in your customer's environment. So for those of you familiar with Zero Trust design, that's what GDAP is built for. It's really meant to make it easy to control your security infrastructure that way, following least privilege access on the relationship. And that's the big change that Microsoft wants, is to get people away from having global admin access on the MSP side into customers' environments. Generally, for the majority of the work, global access is not needed to do everything. You can find specific roles to do those tasks. And then further that, the least privilege access on your own team for who gets to do what, rather than giving your level 1 technicians access to manage conditional access policies, you're able to then give them the specific roles that they need. And then time-bound access to those security groups for just-in-time permissions is another really foundational security principle that I see MSP starting to pick up a little bit more. And this last one here, of your MSP's internal Entra account being a separate entity from your CSP and then your GDAP, comes from Microsoft. I would say, Robbie, maybe 5% of our customers that we've interacted with actually follow that. It's not a huge amount. So if you see that and you start panicking that you're not doing that, it's not a huge issue. Microsoft recommends that because if you have like an HR person or a people who aren't going to be actively in your customer's environment, they shouldn't have access or be in an environment that would give them that access to begin with. So there would be a second account that you'd have to juggle. Again, we don't see that very commonly, but it is part of Microsoft's best recommendations. So I just wanted to make sure I talked about that. So where I see common problems within people's GDAPs setup is the first one's not taking Granular seriously. They'll go in and they'll create the relationship requests. Microsoft makes it really easy to select all and then send off those relationship requests with 76, I believe, roles, including global admin. That includes permissions for stuff that you as a business don't really need or are unlikely to actually use inside the scope of work that MSPs generally occupy. That ties into the second one, giving themselves global admin. Microsoft really doesn't want the MSP space having global admin roles on their relationships. They make that clear by having it so that way when the relationship is requested, you can't auto extend the relationship by if you include global admin. If you don't include global admin and you use a more granular list of roles, then that's not a problem. You can auto extend that. And then the last one is not using security groups effectively or properly on their own internal team for the division of work and segregation of duties. So talking about, well, let me get rid of that teams. Talking about when you're going to set up your GDAP, the big one is understanding what you as a business and your contracts are with your customers and how they line up with how your business operates. So understanding where your team fits. Are you a bigger MSP with a level 1, 2, 3 help desk roles with maybe even a security specialist role? And then making sure that you divide up those people into the specific security groups, because security groups in your internal Entra account tie directly back to the relationships and let you specify the roles that you want each person to have access to. This is really important because, again, you have your level 1 team. They're there to do user management, password resets, configuring or deactivating new users, things like that. They don't need the access to manage conditional access policies, which could inadvertently, if they're not familiar with what they're doing, blow up your entire security posture that you've spent time building for your customer. So I'd recommend booking a meeting internally to discuss what your team actually does as part of your regular contract that you have with your customers, to really identify what roles do we actually need to request. So that way you're not doing scope creep on those roles. So that way, this is what we're able to do. And the value of that also is that in your role, if you don't do any Power BI management or SharePoint management as part of your regular contract, and you don't include that in your relationship that you request to the customer, it's really easy for your sales team to say, "Yep, we're absolutely happy to do that work for you. It does require us to send off a new relationship, and there's going to be contract for work needed to amend your working relationship. So you don't have your enthusiastic team inadvertently start doing work that you're not being compensated for or not originally in your contract. Um, so those are kind of the three things when you're kind of setting up your GDAP to take into consideration. When you're actually in your talking about the security within your GDAP, a big one is the idea of configuring conditional access policies. Now, this is for people who deploy out a P1 or P2 license or equivalent in your environment. And I have seen some MSPs just stick with basic licensing, but really, you want to make yourself a fortress and defense in depth against attackers because of the access that you do get to all of your customers. So when you're building out your security conditional access policy stack for your customers, you can see here I've got a couple screenshots. I have a level 1 tech conditional access policy here where it just requires multi-factor authentication because they're not likely to do any very like higher level security aspects there. And then on the next conditional access policy here, you can see it's set up so it's phishing resistant MFA. There's user risks taken into consideration. The session frequency is they have to re-authenticate once a day. So you can really tailor it based off of the groups that are included to make sure that the people who have higher level access have to go through a more rigorous security flow to make sure there's no vulnerabilities coming from your side. Because again, the MSPs are going to be the target of attackers when you have access to so many more companies like this. And then going back to what I was talking about previously, when it comes to selecting the relationships that you're configuring, we see this pretty often where they request you basically go in, you click everything, and this is great in terms of the ease of use. You have everything. You don't need to go in and request new relationships, ever need to add new services or reconfigure things. But again, and this one doesn't have global admin, which is a great catch because you can auto extend it. But again, it's unlikely that you're doing some of these activities like network administrator or printer technician, unless you're unless you need them, make sure that you're requesting just the roles that you need. So you can see here, this one here, there's only 15 roles requested. It's able to be auto extended. It doesn't include global admin. This one here, you can see unable to auto extend. And it includes global admin. And this can be a talking point when you're doing your initial assessment of a customer's environment, when you're looking at things to bring up about security. You can talk to how you as an MSP take security so seriously. Your competitor MSP that you're trying to replace, hey, they requested a relationship like this or with global admin. That's not best practice according to Microsoft. On the security, that's not following zero trust or least privilege access. There's lots of different principles that you can talk to demonstrate that you are a more security focused option for their business.
I'll let you take a breath while answering a question here. So we have a question that came up that says, how is Augment compliant with all the principles of GDAP while we set up only GDAP through the admin agent security group? So there's a couple of considerations here. So first, the relationship request that we do, I believe that's an example of it here on the screen, uses the least amount of permissions that we actually require to run our product. So we've got those all mapped out in a KB. If we remove any of those permissions, parts of the product stop working. So it is absolutely a least privilege approach. There's a separate step if you choose to do it, which you don't have to, which is leveraging Augment to then delegate these permissions through the admin agents. You're not forced to do it. This is a simplified method because we know the group exists across all tenants out of the box. So it's an ease of use thing versus you creating a custom group, you going and delegating to that group, etc. If you choose to do that through your partner center, if you choose to delegate through 5 groups, if you choose to create the combination of relationships multiple relationships delegated to multiple groups, augment will always work. We just have a tool to facilitate certain steps for people who are trying to get going quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, when the DAP to GDAP migration happened, or people signing up for Augment who didn't have a CSP previously configured, having people go in and manually create a dozen, 2 dozen, or more relationships, it's time consuming, it's tedious. We wanted to do something simple and easy. And realistically, from what I see with MSPs, this like the roles that we request cover a lot of what your base workload is going to include. So you may not need to request further relationships for additional work. It's totally fine for your team to be assigned security groups to this relationship, for them to go about and do the manual tasks that they need to do outside of Augment. So previously I mentioned the security groups that you assign to your tenant or to your users. So you can see here I have a level 2 help desk, a level 3 help desk. Admin agents, like Robbie said, is a default security group that it's easy for us to use programmatically. What this screenshot showing is that the security group here for level 2 help desk is assigned a handful of roles. It doesn't have to include all of them. And the important point that Robbie kind of alluded to is that they overlap, like a kind of like a Venn diagram. So if your level 1 help desk just has user administrator, and your level 2 help desk has these like these three, if a user is assigned to both of those security groups, they have all all 5 roles. So it makes it easy that way, to have the least privilege access principle as part of your core security stack. So it felt kind of quick. I'm going to hopefully dive into a bit of a demo here showing both the partner center, how things come together in Entra, on the security group side, on the conditional access side, and as well just bring up PIM, privileged identity management, for those of you who are running a P2 license, and how that kind of ties into your the security stack here. So just bear with me while I swap over to my browser. So this is a test environment that we have built out that we use for internal testings. I believe you can still see my screen. Probably let me know if you can't. So here's the relationship. This one was created within the Augment tool, but it doesn't have to be. On the customers page here on the administer tab, this is where you'd go and you'd create new relationship requests. So if you were to go in and you would name it customer relationship, you can then set this for a duration of the 30 days that you're doing prospecting work. You can set it to a maximum of 730 days. You can set it to auto extend. Again, you can only it'll auto extend indefinitely every 6 months. But if you request global admin, you lose that ability. And then this is where you'd reference that work that you've done as a team. Rather than clicking select all, you go through and select the specific roles that you actually actively want to use as part of your working relationship. So just for a demonstration, clicking these 3, it's going to save. I finalize the request. And then this part here, this is what you can copy this as an email, send it over to your customer to sign. If you have a global admin technician account into the environment, you can go and improve it. We see MSPs do that. So it depends on the relationship you have with your customer. But once you have that configured and approved on their side, you'll see them appear on the granular administration on the administer tab. Now, one thing to call out, the customer list is different than the administer list. So when you're looking at people that you have an administration relationship with, you just want to check underneath the administer. There are 2 different pieces there, and Microsoft is confusing that way sometimes. So on this tenant here, sorry, let me go back. I grabbed the wrong one. Just wanted to show you how I have my security group set up for my level 1, level 2, level 3 techs. I believe it's this one. So you can see here, level 1 help desk. From these few roles, they have access to groups, license, password, and user, because that's what my level 1 team is only ever going to do. Level 2, I can come into here and I can say, okay, they have application authentication and authentication policy administrator, because they're going to manage those pieces for me. Again, the people who are in the level 2 help desk security group are also going to have access to the level 1. And then level 3 is the same thing: compliance administrator, privilege authentication administrator, security administrator, SharePoint administrator. So group membership ties back into the roles that you get. And if you're a part of multiple security groups, those roles just stack. So you don't have to, you can really curate it to be specific for your teams.
And I guess it could be noted that it could be done both ways. So you can either stack security groups or build security groups that just have bigger stacks of permissions and assign them to the specific people. So for example,
Absolutely.
what David was recommending here is that technician A, who is part of level 2, would get access to level 1 and level 2 security groups. But the
Mm-hmm.
other option is that you create a level 2, uh,
And you assign the roles that all the roles
all
that
the
they
ones
want.
that they need, and then they don't get level 1, they just get level 2. So it
Yeah,
depends
absolutely.
what works for your management style.
Yeah, yeah, you can do it both ways. I just wanted to show the overlapping kind of effect.
Christian
Um,
Nancy just asked, can we use nested groups? I think that's exactly what we just answered. Um,
I,
but if not,
if
please elaborate and we'll be happy to
yeah,
help.
if I understand that properly, yeah, you can use nested groups. The other thing is that um, if we were to create a new security group here, let's say sales agent, or because I don't have one for like level 4, just to echo Robbie's point, I can come into here, save, and they don't cancel out. So if I have a level 3 help desk who's also part of sales agent, it's additive, not diminutive. So it won't take away the roles that sales agent has. It'll just take the level 3 help desk and add those permissions. And this ties back again into the augment integration and other integrations that you might use. You go into your admin agents or whatever security group that integration is referencing, and you can curate the list from there. So sliding back over into Entra, if there's no questions on the partner center. Again, if you have any
One
questions that,
one questions here that might be relevant to partner sites. So it asks, how can we then access all our clients from the partner portal? Do you know how to?
so on the administer side, this is where you would get access to all of your customers. So they would appear here. You'd have a longer list. If you wanted to do work in their environment, you go to the service management tab, and it will, when it loads, let me go in and I can say, okay, I need to go in and do my Entra work. And you can see here, it's going to log me in to that specific environment.
Assuming you gave yourself the right permissions.
Assuming I gave myself the right permissions, which I don't think this user is part of any security group that would have
Yeah.
permissions. And then I can go in and do the work that I need to do there.
So I think, right, if we're extrapolating this a little bit, you'll have a CSP partner account that's got higher privileges that can do all the GDAP relationship assignments, pass down permissions to security groups, etc. Then those technicians will have a CSP partner center account with less privileges than that will
Yes.
have been assigned through to security groups, which will give them access to what would they call the service management section to jump in through the portals. But the reality is, if you haven't used it yet, Microsoft doesn't have a kind of multi-tenant actual view of your customers. It's a partner center to jump into the individual tenants
Yep.
through delegated permissions.
Exactly. And if I was part of a security group going into this account, what you'd see is a temporary user account. You failed again. A temporary user account with those roles. And a big part that I mentioned earlier is the accountability of GDAP. So rather than having like a shared account that people use with your password manager to access the environment. It's a lot easier to trace back, oh, Robbie went into this customer's environment and did this action. Robbie, why did you go and disable their MFA conditional access policies? It's
Bad
a lot.
boy.
Exactly. So it's easier. It's much easier to have the accountability of who's doing what and kind of track those actions across your entire team.
Yep.
Um,
So
because
another good
mistakes do happen.
question came in that is relevant to where we are. So can you add security groups to multiple customers at the same time so you don't have to manually add level one, level two to additional customers, running the risk of setting permissions differently?
No, not which is one of the it shows how much Microsoft is really focused on the pain points of the MSP world. If you were to go in and kind of rejig your the way your company's organized to follow some of these practices, you would have to go in individually and add them. It's been a talking point about Augment looking at doing some of that, but it's not. No, Microsoft doesn't have anything multi-tenanted like that within the partner center.
Yeah, so you can keep using the same security groups, but you have to go to each individual relationship and delegate the permissions accordingly to multiple groups, assuming you're breaking it out like that.
Yeah, exactly. You have to make sure that the security groups are created in those environments as well. If I go
And
into
I'll add that while it's not the uh, most recommended approach, if you are using the admin agents through Augment, the answer is sort of yes, because you can create the relationships, multi-select, delegate, and Augment will take care of that for you. I think we'll probably look at that later, but we'll see.
then yeah, exactly to your point, Richard, in chat, it adds accountability and restricts access, and then make sure that the people who are doing the work can't accidentally do things that they weren't supposed to do. Um, Jumping back over into the Entra side of things now, and we can go back to the partner center if more people have questions that come up. The two pieces that I wanted to talk about, one or a few pieces. One, just all groups. I'm sure we're all familiar with creating security groups. So having clearly defined security groups for the work that you do, um, and and that's a core principle if you're looking to get any of your compliance for like SOC 2, having clearly outlined job descriptions and roles and responsibilities and segregation of duties is a principle that you'll have to be able to demonstrate to the auditors that you're following. And so this is a great way to do that through that way. Um, on the conditional access side of things, I wanted to touch on just a few different things that I like to see. Again, this is a test environment, and so I just built these out this morning. Um, so I built this level one access policy demonstrating kind of what we set up in those screenshots, where it's, in this case, grant with MFA. It's targeted to the specific user, the level one help desk, and so you can create more security blocks for higher level security conditional access policies. So or users rather. And that can include session controls. So your level three techs have to log in and re-authenticate once a day. They have to have certain sign-in risks configured. They have to be on managed devices, depending on if you roll out Intune for device compliance tracking. The one piece that has come up that stumped us for a while is when you have a customer that you're working with, let's say they're an engineering research and development firm, they're super high top security, they have really intelligently designed and very restrictive conditional access policies. This one here, you can, on the exclusion for conditional access policies, exclude external users, specifically B2B collaboration members. I just want to call this out because as your team or platforms like Augment try to access this environment, without this exclusion, and if they have a policy of only on managed devices can people get access, you won't be able to use the partner center to get access or otherwise, or integrations. So by including this exclusion, it allows you to manage or get access. So that'd be a conversation that you'd have to have with your customer to make sure that they're comfortable with that. But then also, that's how you get around that, and that's buried deep in the Microsoft docs. It took me a while to find this particular exclusion. But that's Microsoft for you. So that's how security groups and conditional access policies kind of play in. Again, I'd like to see MSPs get really comfortable with rolling out conditional access to their own internal environment, and building up their security stack through defense in depth, because of the target that is being put on this industry's back. So these are some of the ways that you can do that. Tying, again, security groups to different levels of security practices through conditional access. The last one, just to touch on as we kind of coming to our time, is with privileged identity management. If you have a P2 license in your internal environment, I highly recommend you become familiar with PIM. It's a really, really powerful tool. Unfortunately, it's one of those Microsoft things where they gate it by licensing. But the big one is the ability to assign groups, and have users be forced to request access, and have that request be tied into either they have automatic assignment, or they need require approval for assignment. So this one here for my level 1 team, I have it set up so that way the members, they can request access. It lasts 8 hours. It's not permanently assignable. They don't need to require justification, or in this case, I said they need to, but they don't need ticket information. It doesn't require an approver. For your level 3, you can set it so that way they require an approver, so that way someone in your team knows, oh, Robbie's gone in and he's requested access to this. Oh, it's tied to a ticket for this customer in your PSA. That makes sense that Robbie needs to get this permission to go and manage their conditional access policies and approve it. And you can time gate that approval to a shorter window of time. So in this case here, I think I set it to 4 hours. The value of this is that the group membership only lasts for the workday or the working hours that they're going to be actually doing these actions. And then when they're off the clock and no one's really at their desk, no one's going to be able to get into your customer's environment to affect negative change or breach that way, without you getting an alert saying someone's trying to get access to this security group. This also comes into service accounts as well with PIM, I like to mention. So if you're using a service account for Augment or any other integrations that you use, you can use PIM to drop the roles on those accounts, and the integration will still work just fine. And that's only available through PIM. You can have a longer session on PIM, and it kind of ties into our Microsoft Secure Scores and MFA talks that we have coming up next month. But those are ultimately the best practices concepts that I wanted to touch on. Robbie, do you have any burning questions from the crowd?
Plenty of them. So
Fantastic.
I'll go back from the top here. So someone asked if this access shows in the reports to the clients as well, including our MFA. So what will typically happen? So that question I think came in when we were talking about requesting relationships or creating GDAP relationships. That doesn't show up like in Augment per se. What you will get is the typically what we see is that MSPs already have accounts nowadays locally, and so they'll approve those requests themselves. And if you're doing it from that perspective, the customer will simply never see it, but they can go in their dashboards and see it themselves, assuming you didn't lock them out. And I know some people would have strong sentiments around that kind of approach. And so I think that's roughly the answer there. If you're doing it through, say, you're prospecting a customer, you don't have an account in their environment, you're setting them a GDAP relationship request, they're going to see exactly what you're asking for and then approve it, and hence they can see it in their account, they can revoke it anytime, etc. It is not currently in the Augment dashboards from that.
And then
Although
the
you can
user,
see it in our, you can get a glimpse of the relationship requests that you've asked to pull through Augment.
And then on the user action side of things, the customer or your team is able to go into the individual tenant and see in the audit trail for that user in the audit logs and sign in logs. Oh, this user went in at this time and did these actions. So that's all auditable, and then that ties back into a specific user in your environment.
Okay, so another question that came in earlier was, so what do you recommend for an MSP to create in terms of number of admin accounts? One per tech, or per function, or is it one per customer per function?
Um, Again, it depends on how your business is organized. You want to be able to give your team the tools that they need to be able to work as efficiently as possible without slowing them down, while at the same time not compromising security. So internally, we have people like 90% of their work is low privileged and 10% is high privileged. A few people have high privilege access, and we restrict that way. Um, if and then the rest of the team has the access that they need for 90% of the work. You can then create a second security group that has those higher permission accesses, and then using PIM restrict it, requiring an approver from a specific people on your team. So that way, if Robbie says, "Hey, I need to go and do this action," um, it's that 10% exception. He can go off and do that and not be blocked needing someone else to go and do that. So that's the whole idea of just-in-time permissions. Can tie into the security group configuration.
Yeah, I think those not paying for P2, which is like the majority.
Yeah,
I think what you at minimum want is each individual technician to have an account, and then they receive the permissions delegated from the different tenants, right? This kind of like the least you need to do. That way you're able to audit any of the things done by the individual technicians versus what we used to see a lot of, which was an admin account on each tenant, which was then shared by a bunch of technicians. So auditing
yeah,
was extremely difficult.
yeah, exactly. And that just echoes Matthew's point in chat. Like you want every tech to have an account to then be able to go and do the work that they need to. Then that
Yeah, and I would say like a technician that if a technician had to log in with one account to go reset a password, but log in with a separate account to go modify a conditional access policy, you're getting, I think, excessive, and that will reduce your efficacy. And one thing we do have in Augment is a way to see when users have permissions that they haven't used in a while. So there's a check for that that will tell you, hey, this user has unused privileges, and that's when you go do cleanups instead. So you give a user the permissions you believe they're realistically going to use on a reasonable frequency, and if they change role and they shouldn't have those, then that's when you adjust.
exactly.
I'll another question that came in, I'll just put the answer in the chat. I answered it earlier, but for everyone. So if some of the screens that David went through, you didn't have access to them, you potentially may not have actually had your MSP enroll for the CSP partner program. So that literally means sending documentation to Microsoft to prove who you are as a business, registered business, location, like so on and so forth, right? Probably your CEO or CFO will have to do that, or yourself if you're the owner. So that link in the chat, just wanted to make sure that got around to everyone. I did reply to the person directly. Um, to clarify a point, do security groups level 1 or 2 and users have to be created on the customer environment, or just the tenant being given delegated permissions? That's a good question.
Just the tenant. So the security groups get created in your own environment, and they tie into directly to your team and the configuration there. So you don't have to worry about going into your 20, 30, 100 customers and creating security groups there. It's
Yeah,
just
so
on your environment.
So how it ends up working is, again, when David was in the partner center and he logged into that environment, he's logged in with his user from his organization. And so when he chooses to delegate a relationship permission, the list of groups that appear will be the ones from his tenant. And so
Mhm.
he can go to customer one, into the relationship. I know it's a lot of hops, then pick the delegation for the security group, and he'll see a list of groups from his tenant, and that's the same list that always shows up. So essentially that level one, you'll probably go into customer one, assign a set of permissions to level one, go to customer two, assign a set of permissions to level one, and so on.
Yeah. You can see here where there's the security groups, admin agents 1, 2, and 3, help desk, and sales agent. And those are the ones that show up in my list.
With PIM, could you be a member of Help Desk 3 but not have the request approval to perform actions with delegated permissions?
You could be yeah, exactly. So going back into PIM, just to touch on it again, on groups, I have it set up so that the members have to require justification, require ticket information, and require an approver to activate. And then the members is assigned, or the approver right here is me. But you can set a specific admin group or have multiple individual users as approvers, depending on your workflow. And then again, this one's time gated to 4 hours. You can shorten that up to base whatever you want it to be.
A new interesting question that actually comes down to Augment at this point. So assuming that the permissions in Augment are the same, so for all the customers, does this mean that all users in Augment have identical permissions? From an application perspective, yes, but we do have permission capabilities within Augment, and hence that's a different layer of permissioning to allow least privilege within the product itself.
Yeah.
But there's a single integrated user. Apologies, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to echo. Yeah, it's least privileged on the relationship in terms of what can be done in your customer's environment, but then it's least we built on that the limited number of actions that can be done, even though they might have permissions to do more. What's in the UI is based around like the least amount of things that they would need to do to get their job done efficiently.
Yep.
The anonymous question, do you recommend a brace glass account with less security? Microsoft says your break glass account should be a global admin. They say one of the things that you'll see some debate on is whether or not you have MFA enabled on that account. The idea being that you're supposed to take that account, have it as a break glass account, take the password, make sure it's a long, secure password, take that piece of paper and put it in a safety deposit box or a safe, or quite literally put it behind glass. No one should ever access it or use it. And the idea behind not having MFA enabled on it is if the MFA services are disabled, on like the Microsoft servers are down, or if you're using a third party like Duo, if Duo is inaccessible, you still want to be able to get access to your account. So that's a Microsoft recommendation. You can make an argument for enforcing MFA on that account, or dropping the permissions to something less significant. The one thing you want to make sure is that you have good alerting for those accounts. And you can configure those within Defender for if this account ever logs in, let me know, because that shouldn't happen unless the world's falling apart. So there's some of the extra security steps you want to take with those particular accounts.
And I think one of their latest recommendations, and again, all of this adapts over time, right? Just recently NIST dropped the requirement for like 90-day password rotation, which fell in line with what Microsoft had been doing for a few years now. But I think one of their latest recommendations is to have, what do you call them, David? The YubiKeys are a physical token of sort.
Yeah, FIDO key.
Yeah,
YubiKey, like what we roll out here internally.
And so they're recommending MFA with a physical device. Now, that does leave a potential for if a mistake is made, say in conditional access, that locks everything out in some other way, you could fully trap yourself out. So there's still some digesting, I think, to be done on some of their latest recommendations. But that's I think where the debate that David was talking about it currently spurs from, because it's a fairly new recommendation.
Yeah. I do see in there Microsoft comment from Anonymous saying M365 requiring authenticator set up for global admins. Um, I do remember seeing that in the news. It blagged my memory, so thanks for bringing that up. That is definitely coming. I think the what Microsoft has seen, especially with like the force from no like not using conditional access or security defaults to Microsoft, like if you have a P1 license, they're going to start pushing out Microsoft managed conditional access policies to also forcing everyone to use security defaults. Security defaults is fine for most of your customers. But conditional access just really adds that extra layer. Um, it will be interesting. I have to check to see what Microsoft says now. Their last I read, they did recommend having a break glass with no MFA. So if it's enforcing authenticator for all global admins, I'll have to check to see what the latest is on that. Um,
Yeah, I think the last question we have, or commentee question, I would say, is like I've noticed lately M365 is requiring MS Authenticator to be set up for global admins, which can be a challenge for some logins that are a shared resource. But I
mhm,
think that's what Microsoft is trying to combat is I don't think we should be sharing accounts, if that's what we mean by a shared resource here, is you want everyone to have an individual account, which means use GDAP to delegate the permissions access.
yeah, you can do a shared account with MFA with like if you use a password manager like 1Password, because that way you can share the login access through there with the central MFA token. Um, exactly. Richard with IT Glue. And that also allows you to do control of who has access to it, but also auditing of who last retrieved those credentials, um, which gives you at least a way to point a finger at whoever went into that customer's environment
Yeah.
or your environment. But again, you shouldn't be using break glass accounts in general, um, hence the name. Um, and you should limit the number of global admins that you have to as few as possible, and especially going into customers' environment.
And I think that's the crux of it is like you really want to be able to identify who's doing what, or if there's a rogue employee, you want them to be specifically limited. And if you share an account, it probably has more permissions than what each individual user should realistically have. So
Mhm.
moving over to individual accounts and it's the reality is putting in the work to do the GDAP relationships because if it's your first time, it is work.
Mhm.
Um, and then you'll be set up in a best practice scenario.
Yeah, yeah. It comes back to the earlier slides of understanding your business. What is it that your team is actually going to do? Booking a meeting to review what roles you actually need to get that job done. Configuring tight relationships that meet that. And then again, that lets you have those conversations with your customers when they're trying to add more um, requirements to the work that your team needs to do. Oh, well, our original contract was for this. We don't have that permission. We need to get more permissions. It's a lot easier to re-engage your the sales cycle internally of, oh, you want us to rebuild your SharePoint site. Okay, we don't have SharePoint administrator. Um, so let me get the sales team involved.
Yeah, someone made an account that they were trying to use a MFA from a 1Password account yesterday, and it would not allow it to log in. Obviously, I don't know the rest of the situation, but this can absolutely be true. So, for example, when you try to authenticate, I'm using APIs because of my experience with building Augment, but when you try to do an integration through Augment, which uses the CSP partner APIs, Microsoft specifically requires authentication to be done with MFA through Authenticator, and it would
Mm-hmm.
not accept any other tool, a Duo, a 1Password, etc. So it may be something like you were trying to do a privileged uh, thing of sorts, and hence 1Password just won't work. You have to switch to Authenticator. Like that is a reality of Microsoft for specific things.
Yep.
Not that I have an exact list of them. I think this is it. I think we're all out of questions.
Yeah.
Um,
If you have any
so
other questions or if anybody needs help on CSP setup, I spend a lot of time doing that. So I'm happy to answer any questions via email. Um, this recording
yep,
should be sent out to everybody who signed up.
yeah,
So I
reach
hope,
out to us. I mean, we we've literally had a lot of people reach out to our support team, our partners or not sometimes even people just trying us out, and we end up solving Microsoft problems because it's easier to get a hold of us than it is Microsoft support. So we're here
yeah,
to help. We're here for the channel. We hope you appreciate these webinars. We'd love to see you again, and thank you for the
yeah,
the time and the great
the,
engagement. This was
yeah,
fantastic.
excellent questions.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.